What is in the cell? Oh boy, interesting. It's got a little green spot, like a nucleus. That's crazy. You could be up to 70% water. How are you not leaking everywhere? Because all that water is stored inside of your cells. Redeem Academy. Yo, what is up, Science Squirrels? Johnny here with Redeem Academy. I'm here to help you make the most out of your education while giving God the glory He deserves. Today's lesson is about animal cells. I'm gonna go over 3 things. I'm gonna go over how the cell is like a factory. I'm gonna go over a bunch of the parts inside of cells. And the third thing I'm gonna do is give you 2 examples of animal cells: muscle cells and brain cells. Cells are amazing because as we have learned more about the cell, we have seen just further and further how designed the cell is, and it gives glory to God that cells look designed. They are so orderly and so organized. It speaks to how beautifully and intricately God made life. Today's episode is brought to you by brain cells, the tiny heroes inside your head, powering your thoughts even if your family thinks you might not have any. Your brain cells help you balance, walk, jump, and not fall flat on your face most of the time. Every signal they send is powered by electricity. Don't worry, it's safer than that time you stuck a fork in an outlet. Hit that subscribe button before your brain cells wander off, and grab a notebook at redeemacademy.org. All right, big question today. How did God engineer the same cell parts to help a brain cell send messages but help a muscle cell move? So the cell is like a factory. And here in Oregon, a lot of kids have been to this famous cheese factory called the Tillamook Cheese Factory in Oregon on the coast. But I had a job in college where I got to tour an even better factory every week, a toilet paper factory. So to help you understand the cell, I'm going to give you just a little dose of my history working for a company called Fastenal. The company I worked for supplied nuts and bolts, and I got to drive a little truck like that back in the day. And I would drive this truck out to the Georgia Pacific paper mill out in Halsey, Oregon. And this place had a terrible smell. And it got its terrible smell because it would take it would take wood chips. You can see a big pile of wood chips over there. And they would turn wood chips into pulp. And so they take these giant piles of wood chips that they're going to use to make toilet paper, and they would chemically treat them, and they would cook them, and they would turn them into this stuff called pulp. And this is the key to making paper. They would then smash this pulp. After they chemically treated it, they create all these terrible smells. And then they would smash it on these giant rollers. These things were massive. Just look back at this picture. This place was enormous. Here's the parking lot over here. Hundreds of people worked at this place, and it ran 24/7. My boss had to have his cell phone on at all times, because if they ever ran out of something, it cost him like $1 million an hour if they ever weren't making toilet paper. So anyways, these giant rollers would make what to me just looked like giant rolls of toilet paper that like Paul Bunyan would wipe his butt with or something. And they would then take these giant rolls of toilet paper and they would put them on other conveyor belts and machines that would cut them into smaller rolls, and then they would eventually get packaged and they'd eventually get shipped out and sold at stores. Now my job when I showed up was to go to the office and to drop off any paperwork I had. I wasn't in charge of anything. I usually just dropped stuff off, and then I went and talked to some guys in an office to see if they needed anything, and this was the office. And then I'd go talk to these guys in this room called the machine shop. And these guys made stuff out of metal, and I would talk to them, ask them if they need anything. They had our books, and they could give me orders that they wanted to order. And then I'd go check these things called our bins where our nuts and bolts were kept. And if anything was low, I'd just order some more stuff, and then I was out of there. It was a once-a-week trip, and I was just one of the guys who made this trip occasionally. So this is my closest experience to a factory. And what's interesting about this factory, when you look at it from a big picture, is it was basically wood chips in and toilet paper out. And that was the big picture of what this place was about. Wood chips in, toilet paper out. So I'm going to show you how the cell is like a factory that God has created for doing all kinds of interesting things. But instead of being a factory that produces toilet paper, cells all basically follow the same rule of being factories that use proteins to get their jobs done. And it's going to take me really the rest of the year for you to fully see that, but you're going to get to see the beginnings of that during this unit. Now there's one other important question we need to go over when we're talking about toilet paper. There are two kinds of people in this world, okay? People who do things the right way and people who do things the wrong way. I hope your parents are raising you to be the right kind of person. That's all I'm going to say. All right, so think of the cell like this to understand what it does. Think of it as a factory. And just like factories have lots of things inside of them and lots of people that do lots of jobs, cells have tiny little organs inside of them, and they're called organelles. Now, maybe you've caught on, my name is Johnny.
Oh, hi, Johnny.
Johnny is like the little kid version of the name John, and organelle is like the little kid version of the name organ. Okay? So when you hear the word organelle, just think of the word organ, like we have organs inside of ourselves. Organelle is just like
Little Johnito.
little Johnny.
Little Johnelli.
And just like cells are little, they have little tiny organs inside of themselves. All right, now this is an animal cell. Animal cell. This little guy down here. Now, if that's the first time you've ever seen that, that is pretty strange looking. It's called a cross section. Now, to help you understand what a cross section is, I have an onion.
Well, I'm gonna eat it.
I was hoping for an apple, just walked out to the kitchen. I do a lot of spontaneous things while I teach. Not all my videos are planned, I'm sure you can tell. So we think of cells as round, and when we show them on a piece of paper is flat, so we can't do round. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this in half and show you the inside. Knife. Okay. Oh boy. Well, interesting. It's got a little green spot, like a nucleus. I'm gonna show you under the camera. All right, so here's my onion. So you can see that when I cut it in half, it looks very different than when it's on the outside. In the same way, when I show you a picture of the cell, I'm trying to show you what a cell would look like if I cut it in half and exposed what was on the inside. Okay, so now that we've chopped open this protein factory, you can see there's lots of little parts in there. Okay, the names for all those little parts is organelles. All right, so all the organelles are listed here. Now, I realized after I made this that I should probably number them, and some of them I'm actually not going to write down today with you, so I'm just going to put them in your notes automatically. Now, just as when I would go to the toilet paper factory, I went to the office first because that's where the orders come in and where the information is sent out to make more toilet paper. For the people who work in the toilet paper factory, they're going to take all their orders from the office. There's an office in the cell, and it's called the nucleus. And this big orange ball is called the nucleus. Now that should sound familiar because atoms have a nucleus. Cells are made of trillions of atoms though. So totally different nucleus. The word nucleus just means center. So the reason atoms and cells both have a nucleus is just because they both have a center. All right, so the ordering office of the factory is the nucleus. Now for cells, once the office, the nucleus, sends out an order, hey, we need to make something, it's always going to be made out of protein or it's going to be made by proteins. And so it's always going to involve proteins getting involved. Proteins are made by little 3D printers in the cell called ribosomes. Now I want to show you what a 3D printer looks like in case you've never actually seen one do its job. They're so cool. Check this out. So here we have a little 3D printer and it's going to 3D print a little baby Groot.
I am Groot.
Groot's from Guardians of the Galaxy, if you haven't seen that movie. And so it shows a time lapse here where the 3D printer starts moving. I think the table is actually the thing that moves. I think he's got the camera mounted on the table so it looks like the other thing is moving. And you can see a little spool of string is coming out. That string is actually plastic. And so most 3D printers print in plastic. And you can see it's just time lapse slowly 3D printing baby Groot's body. And once his body is done, then it's going to 3D print his head. And so his head's going to go right there. And then little pieces have to be broken off. And so you're not going to see that portion of his neck, and that stand is probably just for him to stand there while it 3D prints. And there you go. They attach his head to his body and it's done. Now here's something I think is even more interesting that maybe you haven't heard of, is they are now 3D printing houses. Okay, check this out. So they're literally 3D printing a house right now out of concrete with a machine they set up. There's a board they're printing over, so they'll probably remove the board eventually. It's just acting as a frame. And you can see there's a hollow space in between the walls. But look at that. I'm I'm just gonna pause it. So literally, all that concrete was 3D printed. They still put the windows in, they got some bricks they added there, and they're obviously building a roof on top of it, but they're 3D printing all those lines of concrete with a machine. And so there's the machine, and it kind of like lays down the concrete and sort of drags itself on top of the concrete and just throws down all these layers. And in a second here, yeah, there's the giant 3D printer that prints the concrete. Absolutely amazing. And they use computers, and I mean, how do you even begin to get a computer to do all this right? But guys are smart, and you put enough time into something, you can get it to turn out right. In the same way, God, a long time ago,
in the beginning,
designed a 3D printer that prints in protein. And the 3D printers of protein print three-dimensional proteins inside of us, and those proteins act as little machines that you're going to get to see in this unit that do all kinds of interesting functions inside of us. They also make up a big portion of our body. So our skin is mostly made out of protein, our hair is made out of protein, our muscles are made out of protein. The portion of our bones that isn't minerals is made out of protein. So there's so much of us that's actually made out of protein, and there's little tiny machines inside of us that are proteins that do things. Okay, so number 5 right here is a ribosome. You can't even see it. You'll get to see it later, but not even in this unit. And ribosomes are tiny little 3D printers. They can operate freely floating around in the cell, or they attach to this darker blue thing that is the machine shop of the cell. Let's go ahead and label it right now. Number 3, it's called the rough ER. And the rough part comes from the fact that it has little bumps all over it from ribosomes. And the ER stands for a big word, endoplasmic reticulum. You're never going to remember that. All right, so the 3D printer of the cell that prints the orders always has proteins is the ribosome. So in my toilet paper factory experience, there was a machine shop, and there were these guys who were called machinists who would take things and modify them and change them, and that's exactly what the rough ER does inside of cells. So this is an example of machining something. Machinists tend to work with metal. I don't know if they ever don't work with metal. But what they do is they just make very specific, intricate little parts that are needed for machines, and they use machines to make them. And a lot of times, if you work in a factory, there's going to be very unique little pieces to some of the machines in that factory, and you're not going to be able to just order it from a catalog, so a machinist will recreate a part that breaks. And sometimes you can just order parts, like I worked for a factory that just brought in nuts and bolts, but other times they'll take a piece like this as a piece of aluminum, and they're just shaping it into a really strange shape and making it what it needs to be. A machinist would also be someone who kind of takes like this little piece of baby Groot's head and removes that little bottom piece. That little bottom piece is there just for it to be a stand while it gets printed, but then you don't need it for the final product. And so these are the kind of refinements that happen in the rough ER. It changes little parts of what the 3D printers make so that the final product can go together. Okay, so the machine shop that refines those printed proteins is the rough ER. Now remember, in my toilet paper factory story, there's actually machines driving around inside the factory. It's so big. The cell is the same way. The cell has all kinds of trucks driving around inside of it. One of them is called a lysosome. That's like a garbage truck. A more general term for all the trucks is a vesicle. And you can see those forklifts are loading up toilet paper, and maybe you've seen factories with these doors on the back end before. Those load straight into semi-trucks, and those semi-trucks drive away. Vesicles can go outside of the cell as well. So the trucks of the factory that move stuff around are called vesicles. Now, those trucks can't just drive anywhere, and the cell has special roads for the trucks to drive along as they carry things, and those roads are called the cytoskeleton. All right, that's number 1 up here, cytoskeleton. And you can see there's a red line here. There's also a red line down here. I'm going to show you a video in a second of the cytoskeleton and trucks moving along the cytoskeleton. It's absolutely amazing. I'm just trying to get through the cell real quick. Now this room where the loading happens and where a lot of the vesicles come from in the cell is called the Golgi apparatus. That's a funny name. All right, let's go over here. The roads inside the factory where trucks drive, cytoskeleton, and the mailroom where things are sent out is the Golgi. Okay, last organelle I'm going to tell you about. What is in the cell? Is it full of air or fluid? What do you think? Fluid. Have you ever heard people talk about how much of your body is water? Okay, so you look it up online. What percent of the body is water? Water makes up approximately 50 to 70% of total body weight. That's crazy. You could be up to 70% water. How are you not leaking everywhere? Because all that water is stored inside of your cells. So every tiny drop of water is in a little bag called a cell. That's why I colored this cell blue. And number 9, there's a special name for the fluid in the cell. It's called cyto, which means cell, and plasm, which to me sounds like a word that means fluid. I'm not exactly sure what plasm means. And so cytoplasm is the fluid of the cell. Oh my goodness, that was so much learning all at once. It is time for some real life examples. Did you notice that really strange cover? Did you wonder what that was about? This video will show you the answer to that.
Our brain is made of billions of nerve cells, and they're all connected. If we take a closer look, a nerve cell seems to have antennas. Most of them are receivers of information, but only one is a transmitter, called the axon. This axon is connected to several receivers of other cells, forming a gigantic neural network, the brain.
Okay, that's cool by itself. So you have these tiny little brain cells going everywhere, and you have billions of them, and they have a lot of antenna, but one main antenna, and that, oh, I like how that looks on the camera. Ooh, fancy. And so that antenna sends signals. The other ones all receive signals. Okay, cool. So this video I'm going to show you is all about how brain cells receive signals and then send their one main signal.
Meet John. John is a kinesin,
I love John.
A motor protein. He lives inside a nerve cell, and he has a proper job.
He has the best slippers.
To ensure that a brain cell does his job properly, it needs the continuous flow of building materials, proteins.
See little tiny John?
They travel through the cell using the cytoskeleton.
Oh, cytoskeleton. Okay, so this whole cartoon you're going to watch is a metaphor for how the cell works, okay? It's saying this cartoon is like a brain cell. Because here's the thing. We show you this weird picture of a cell and it's just a little blob and like, what does that have to do with real life? Nothing. We teach kids this basic cell, but it's not a real cell. You can't find it in your body. Real cells are all specialized for different jobs in specific tissues. Brain cells look one way, muscle cells look another way. So we teach this general cell, like it's got all the parts, but it doesn't really exist. So I'm going to show you 2 real examples of real cells, how they look, they have those parts, but they look different for their different jobs. So here's John, the little white dots, and he's going to travel down the hairs inside the nerve called the cytoskeleton.
Using the cytoskeleton. If you would compare a nerve cell with a city, the cytoskeleton inside the cell would be the roads, and the traveling proteins would be the traffic. These materials are towed by motors along the roads. And just as in real life, there are different kinds of motors and different kinds of roads. John's sole purpose in life is to deliver his cargo to a specific place in the axon. He takes the main roads, and he walks in just one direction only. John's job may seem easy, but it's not. He has to overcome a number of obstacles to ensure that the right amount of cargo arrives at the right place. To make the journey even more difficult, John is not alone. Other motor proteins ride along with his cargo. They haven't woken up yet, but that will happen soon.
Okay, so that big blob is a vesicle. So cells have these little blobs all over the place that need to travel around, and motor proteins carry them through the cell.
The journey starts in the center of the city, just like in the center of the cell. To enter the axon, John has to pass a place called the axon initial segment. In this segment, there are 2 kinds of roads.
Can you see the city? They're showing you the city inside of the nerve cell. Oh, I am a nerd and I love this.
The main roads that John uses, called the microtubules, and a lot of little alleys called actin. And here, our brave motor protein meets his first challenge, because one of his sleeping travel companions, myosin, has woken up and starts to cling to the actin. And there are a lot of alleys. Only brute force can save John now.
Oh.
Fate.
All right, link in the description. Go watch the video if you want to. I want to show you a more realistic version of John the Motor Protein. Check this out. I'm not sure why there's like 2 or 3 of them on there, but they're pulling a giant vesicle, or maybe it's a mitochondria. And what's even more interesting is the cytoskeleton will form. You can see in front of it, the cytoskeleton's forming. It will form and it will come apart as needed to direct them to go into different places. And you can see how its feet just slowly walk along the cytoskeleton and pull the vesicle to where it needs to go. As it walks along the vesicle, it pulls, and that you can see the cytoskeleton forming there, and then it pulls this giant vesicle behind it. And it's just a little motor. It's just a little protein motor that does all this work. Does this look like it formed by chance? Does this look like blindless evolution could just make this? No way. These things scream, I was made by God. A lot of times kids are like, cells are so boring. The thing that makes cells so amazing is that when you look inside of cells, you discover these things were made by an incredibly powerful, incredibly intelligent agent. That agent is God. These cells transmit their signals in part by using motor proteins pulling around vesicles. It's much more complicated than that, but that's part of it. And these cells are brain cells. So God uses some of these parts, the cytoskeleton and vesicles, in real cells like brain cells to move things around all the way down this thing to make stuff work. All right, let's look at another cell. Muscles. All right, the first year I started teaching, I got these animations with my textbook. Shout out to Pearson. Thank you for allowing this video to be on YouTube. The narration leaves you wanting a little bit.
We move our bodies by shortening or contracting our muscles.
Oh my gosh,
Let's take a closer
we're
look.
Contracting our muscles. I'm gonna be your narrator. Okay, so we zoomed inside of that lady's muscle, inside of her calf muscle, and look at these hairs sticking out of her muscle. JK, those aren't hairs, those are nerve fibers. And the nerve fibers are innervating her muscles, which means they're poking them, and electric shocks will come through the nerves. That's what John the Motor Protein is helping make happen. And then bam, electricity hits. Any second now, I swear.
Is it happening now?
Wow, it's happening so fast. This is in like 10 million times slow motion, and it shortens the muscle fiber. This is how muscles work. They can only shorten. Did you know this about your muscles? There is no muscle in your body that can push, only pull. So then you're like, wait a minute, then how do I push things?
The force will be with you.
You have muscles here that contract, that shorten to make your bones come close, and then there's always a muscle group on the other side that contracts to pull them back away. Okay? But it's always a pulling. Muscles can only shorten. Prove me wrong. You won't be able to. So back to this, what that electric shock did was it caused these muscles to shorten. And there's what's called the thin filaments and the thick filaments, and they slide into each other. So here's muscle contraction in a nutshell. You've got thin and thick filaments, and they get closer together. And when they get closer together, the muscle gets all, and then people are like, whoa, Johnny, do you work out? And I'm like, no, it's all natural. I'm just built like this, just built different. So as those thin and thick filaments come together, they bulge up, and we call that flexing. Now, what's going on inside of the actual muscle cells to make this happen? Let's zoom down and find out. What in the, That's kind of scary, Johnny. Makes me feel uncomfortable to look at this. I don't know if my mom wants me to watch this. Okay, so the thin filaments are getting sucked together by the thick filaments pulling on them. And we zoom in and it gets even freakier. What in the, science fiction movie? Should I be watching this? Okay, and so this is weird, but this is really how it works. It's not the best animation. It's from like 2008. So these purple things are myosin, which is one of the motor proteins, and the orange things are called actin. It's one of the cytoskeleton proteins. And when that electric shock comes, those green ions are part of that electric shock thing, myosin will pull on actin. It's just like John the motor protein. It's his cousin, Bob the motor protein. And he pulls on it and he shortens the overall length. And that's how it do. But when you have 1 trillion of these things doing it, wait for it. There they are. It looks really freaky and strange in this animation, but that's how it happens inside of your muscle fibers. And if you go to the gym a lot and work out, instead of having 1 trillion of them, you'll have 2 trillion of them. And then you'll be like, "What's up, ladies? Is it gym day? Which way to the weight room?" And as we zoom out, big picture, see the big picture here. It causes the shortening of the muscle cells, and the shortening of the muscle cell causes the muscles to function. Shorter muscles, bones get closer together. We call this movement, comes from electric shocks, tiny microscopic electric shocks that you can barely feel. And the muscles get shorter, and then there you are again, being that lady running around the track. She's so fast. So fast. That's me, only slightly different. So these magical cells, this is actually one muscle cell right here. It's called a muscle cell or a muscle fiber. Once again, does that look like something, all those complex parts moving together and working together only when you tell them to? Does that look like something that just happened on accident? Or does it look like something that was designed on purpose? It was definitely made by God on purpose. Okay, so a couple of real examples of animal cells. We have the cell that sends information in the brain using motor proteins and the cytoskeleton. That is called a brain cell. Big word for that is neuron. And we have a long cell that contracts to move your bones and uses motor proteins pulling along the cytoskeleton to help it do its job. That's called a muscle cell. And what's interesting is both of these use the cytoskeleton in different ways, and they use motor proteins. That brings us back to the big question: how did God engineer the same cell parts to help a brain cell send messages but help a muscle cell move? There you go, the last two things we just saw. So God uses motor proteins and the cytoskeleton to do two totally different things in two totally different cell types. In brain cells, it carries around vesicles containing important stuff that helps nerves send signals. But in muscle cells, it shortens the overall length of the muscle cell to allow bones to get closer together so that you can feed yourself that Twinkie that you're eating. Amazing, amazing designs. So what God does in general is he takes these general parts that you learned about, the different organelles, he takes those parts and he modifies them for each type of cell in the body to make them do the job that that cell needs to do. Amazing way that he works. As we continue to study the cell, you're going to see just how amazing God's designs are and how when we study cell biology, we see cells cry out, "I was created." I hope this lesson was interesting for you. I hope that you can see how cool it is to learn about cells, to see how wise and absolutely elegant God made things. Have a great day. Peace out, brown trouts.